Hey, Eric here, and I'm home on a snow day on Tuesday. Um, Took me a while. I'm using my wife's new laptop, so I'm in her office here. Let's go ahead and minimize this. So I'm going to take 10 minutes or so to talk about the work you did on activity number 2. That was the analysis of the Daniel Dennett article, the excerpt from his book, Common Sense Religion. So you can go back to the quiz area, find that activity, and you can see the individualized feedback I left you. So you should definitely do that. The grade should already be in the grade book. Finding the individualized feedback in this class can be somewhat difficult. You should see it in the grade book. You should be able to actually find the grade book item and open up the feedback there. Go to the quiz area, return to your quiz, and you should be able to see the feedback that I left you. If you can't find it, email me and I'll help you figure it out. But what I'm going to do in this screencast is something you'll see most weeks of the class where as I go through and read the answers that you gave, I copy and paste some of the great answers, some of the interesting answers. Sometimes I paste some of the common misconceptions or just the different representative samples from uh, answers from you and your classmates. You may see one of your answers up here. Since this is a video, if you're interested, you can certainly pause the video and read all of the responses that I copied and pasted. I'm only going to talk about a few of them. And so let's just dig in. We're a minute and 35 seconds in. So first of all, let me just say that I was very happy with your work. Almost everyone took at least 35 to 45 minutes on this activity. Many of you took an hour or more. And I think that's representative of the amount of time you should plan to be spending on activities. Often they include reading, watching short videos, but really this is an opportunity for me to see you grappling with the material, thinking, entertaining ideas, and then adding your own thoughts. And so I look at these activities, and Carrie's doing the same thing, and we call these formative assessments. So we are assessing what you can do, and the formative nature of these kinds of assessments means that the intent is to watch you while you're grappling with the material. Before you've perfected, before you've mastered things, this is our chance to actually see you learning and struggling, getting things right, getting things wrong. This gives us an opportunity to give you feedback, to help you move forward, or to note the great work you're doing, to see where the class is. And we want to do this pretty quickly so that we can turn around and get information back to you that you need in time that you can make changes to your study habits or whatever. So this is an especially challenging article. It's provocative. It's touching on a subject that many people find I don't know, personal or important. We're talking about religion. So this is a real struggle for some students to actually entertain Daniel Dennett's ideas, since they may not be things you agree with or believe in. So it's a high bar. It's a challenge to withhold your judgments and to just try to summarize and think about what is Dennett trying to say, and look at it in the best possible light. And so by and large, I mean, just across the board, people did an excellent, excellent job. So let me just run through some of these questions. I'll pick out a few highlights. I'm also going to take a few minutes at the end to answer the questions that you asked about Dennett, or to do my best to tell you what I think Dennett would say. So question one, I asked you to think about the first part of the excerpt where he talks about thou shalt not kill. And I think most of you are right on track. I could have really copied and pasted almost all of your work here. I'll just read you what Jesse had to say. Dennett is suggesting that many moral quandaries are more complex than they appear at face value, that taking an absolutist stance without supporting rationale and evidence is both intellectually lazy and unsustainable. It may sound simple to say something like thou shalt not kill, or that every life is equally valuable, and that is a laudable, idealistic goal. But actually dealing with real life ethical situations makes applying a standard like that extremely difficult, if not impossible. So that's really what he's getting at here. Ethics, it may sound easy to come up with this kind of absolutist approach, but applying it in the real world often takes much more sophistication and thought. So it's not as simple as thou shalt not kill. Because then we have to think about, well, what about killing in self-defense? Or what about the death penalty? Or what about killing in war? And those sorts of things. Are those exceptions? And, anytime you have an absolute rule, we start maybe thinking about possible exceptions. And so we're going to be thinking later this semester about absolute moral theories, those that kind of lay down a moral law and try to justify an all or nothing approach to ethics, and we'll certainly look at some theories that talk about nuances and a different way of looking at ethics. Let's move on here. Let's see if I can figure out my wife's computer here. Question 2. Dennett offers this analogy about voting, right? I mean, the general gist of his article, and I think everyone got that, was that we need to be careful trusting people, right? We need to take responsibility for our own beliefs, our own arguments. And so, but he gives this analogy where when he goes to vote, he tends to trust his wife's judgment. And I think most of you are right on track here. It's definitely the case that having faith in someone does not make having faith in someone is not enough, right? And so Kelsey says they must have legitimate qualifications to influence or even make your moral decisions, right? So why does he use this particular example? It is sometimes okay to delegate authority to someone else, is what Dennett's trying to say. He's not saying never trust anybody. He's not saying make every single decision based on your own effort. But he's saying when you do delegate authority to someone else to make decisions for you, you want to know that you can trust them, and you want to have reasons and rationales and justifications. And so what would he say? I'm not trusting my wife because she's my wife. I'm not taking her opinion because I love her. I've been married for 25 years, he might say. We've talked about candidates ad nauseum, hour after hour. And over all these years, my wife has really shown that we really are simpatico when it comes to the kinds of things we want in a political candidate. I know that she's very thoughtful in researching, and so I tend to let her do the research. And since she understands my values and we're in sync with our values, I tend to vote the way she votes. So he's trying to draw a distinction between maybe blind faith, where you just trust someone no matter what, and the kinds of cases where you would have a reason to trust them. And I think Dennett might say this. I think he does say it. If we really were to hash things out, her arguments would make sense to me, and I've heard those arguments many, many times. So again, I think this analogy, he's trying to say sometimes it's okay to trust someone under certain circumstances, but even then you're taking a risk. But there are certainly cases where you don't want to delegate authority without being really careful. Let's move down. I combined questions 3 and 4. This is where he's talking about what cases does, sorry about this, in what cases do people make it impossible for the rest of us to take their view seriously, and what does it mean to say a person is disabled from moral persuasion? And so I put up a few representative answers here. There were lots of good ones. Chris says, people who don't think for themselves are not capable of making sound decisions, therefore they should not be allowed to partake in claiming what is right or wrong. If you want to claim what's right and wrong, and if you want to join into a conversation with someone, you have to think for yourself, because you have to be able to offer up the reasons that someone else can understand. Taylor says, by blindly following and delegating the moral reasoning to religious leaders, the people that make this decision are irrational, right? Arguments are based on reasons and things that everyone who's involved in the argument can understand and comprehend. And so if you want to join into conversation and argument with someone, you have to bring those arguments to the table, right? You can't just say because someone says so. Frankie says, people allow their choices or lack thereof to be dictated by their religious leaders. They remove their own accountability and even limit their own thought processes based on the simple fact that, quote unquote, God says so. Jesse's answer is very good too. So don't be disabled from moral persuasion, right? I mean, think about that. When you enter into a moral argument with someone, what you're saying is, I have an idea about what's right, and you have an idea about what's right, and they may be different. And the reason we're going to argue is I want to convince you that I'm right, and I know that you want to convince me that you're right. So we both kind of have to enter this argument with some humility and say, let's put our arguments on the table, let's fully entertain each other's thoughts, and whichever argument is better, that's probably the better idea, right? So in order to do that, you really have to be willing to offer up your arguments, and you have to have those, the reasons and the claims and the evidence in your own mind so that you can provide them to someone else. Awesome work there. And I will pause here, so if you want to read what a few other folks had to say. I like Victoria's response here. Many of these people have no rational thinking because they believe so much in their religion, they exclude any possibility of a person with different beliefs being correct. Again, think about entertaining ideas. The reason we want to do it is we have to acknowledge, or we probably want to acknowledge, the slim possibility, right? I mean, that there's a chance I'm wrong, or there's a chance that my ideas aren't perfect. And so we hope to enter arguments, and in this clash of ideas, what we hope is that the best arguments rise to the top. Now, arguments can also help you reinforce your own ideas. If you entertain every counter argument and look at every possible other way of thinking, and you find flaws on all of those, and your arguments really are supreme, then you can be even more confident that your ideas are right. We're more than 10 minutes in, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to question 5. Offers just more of the same, right? Dennett says, some people offer the kinds of moral arguments that say something like this. There's some moral claim, and it is true because God says so, or because that's what all Christians believe, or because that's the Jewish tradition, or because that is the way all good Muslims think. Even if those claims are true, they don't really help in an argument. And think about this. Faith-based claims are extremely powerful, but they're powerful subjectively to the person who has that faith. Faith is something different than reason, right? Faith is, I don't know, in a nutshell, belief without evidence. It's belief in something where there is no evidence, where evidence is irrelevant, or it's just belief beyond the realm of evidence or argument, right? It is that kind of leap in the dark and that extremely powerful kind of personal conviction that you have in something. So there's no doubt that people's own moral beliefs are often grounded in their faith. But what we're talking about here is not your own beliefs. We're talking about moral argument, and this idea that we want to have a conversation with someone or a group of people. We want to persuade someone that my way of thinking about ethics is the best way, and I want to get you to change your mind. And so we have to think about what sorts of tactics, what sorts of evidence are going to be meaningful to someone else. Telling you about my faith is probably not going to serve as an argument for you to believe something. It doesn't matter how much I believe it. It doesn't matter how much my conviction tells me it's true. If I want to convince you, I'm going to have to bring something to the table that you can understand. And since what all human beings share in common in terms of being able to argue is reason, empirical evidence, and those sorts of things, we want to find common ground. And so faith is really the antithesis of common ground. If you're interested in this stuff about faith, you might want to take a philosophy class or a philosophy of religion class where we'd have more time to dig in here. Anyway, I'm not going to, a lot of you had really good responses to, or ways of thinking about what Dennett had to say about Fred. I'll just let you read those. I want to take a couple minutes though. So I know I'm 13 minutes in, but some of you had some questions. I want to go ahead and respond to those questions. Unlike a lot of the philosophers we're going to read this semester, Daniel Dennett is a living person. He is, I know he's a philosophy professor. I think he's at Tufts. He writes a lot about religion, a lot about ethics. He writes a lot about free will. So, I mean, he's a contemporary philosopher, a very well-respected philosopher. So where can you read the rest of it? Well, I gave you almost all of it, but if you do a Google search for Daniel Dennett, Common Sense Religion, you can probably find the entire article that he wrote. It's also an excerpt from an entire book called Common Sense Religion, so you could find that at the library. You could certainly find other things that he's written online. So if you're interested in Daniel Dennett, just do some Google searching, or later this semester we're going to learn how to use library databases. You can find out all sorts of stuff about Daniel Dennett. If you're interested just in this idea of religion and ethics, you can just do some searching on the internet or talk to me. There's tons of stuff out there about religion and ethics. I didn't put your names on these. I put your names elsewhere because I wanted to praise you. I didn't leave your names on the questions just because some of them, I wasn't sure you'd want to share the questions you had with your classmates. Someone said, I'd be interested to hear the author's thoughts on pulling elements from different religions to form your own moral compass. Dennett isn't really interested in religion. Daniel Dennett is an atheist. I don't think he wants to tell people what to believe. And so if you want to pull together ideas from multiple religions to form your own moral compass, I think Daniel Dennett would say more power to you. But pulling ideas from multiple sources isn't going to help you make those arguments any better, because ideas from 3 religions, it still isn't going to help you make arguments to someone else, right? So I think he would say probably lots of us do that kind of thing, mixing and matching different sources to form a moral compass. But again, Dennett isn't really talking about your moral compass. He's not talking about your ethical or moral beliefs. What he's saying is, if you want to enter in a conversation with someone else, religious beliefs probably just don't have a place in that argument at all. It's not a question, but I'd be curious to hear what else he has to say on the subject. He has a lot to say. So again, look up some more stuff about Dennett if you want to. But I think you get a sense of where he's coming from. He's not anti-religious. I mean, personally, he's not religious, but I think he just wants to say we want to draw a distinction between the way we ground our own moral beliefs and the way we try to make arguments to other people about morality. Now, Dennett might say, if you were asking his personal advice, he might say, you might be better off just not believing everything that your religion tells you. You might want to come up with your own arguments, some rational reasons and evidence that might kind of back up those arguments too. Someone said, at what point does a student in a college class start following that class blindly? Maybe it happens, but you definitely don't want to follow anything in this class blindly. I think, entertaining ideas and being a critical thinker. I am open to challenge. I am not an I may be an expert compared to you in philosophy. I've studied it a long time. But for me to you, I think it is worth being skeptical of everything in every class you take. The textbooks, hopefully textbooks are vetted by editors and the facts in there are correct, but biases creep in. And, when it comes to believing or trusting blindly in your teacher, your professor, well, you probably can guess what I would say about that and what Dennett would say. Be polite. The person probably is a content expert. They probably have a PhD or an advanced degree. But, sometimes those personal biases come through. You'll probably see my biases come through in this class. I will try to be explicit and tell you when I'm giving you my opinion versus making an argument grounded in one of the ethical theories, but certainly my advice is be a polite skeptic in all of your classes and be a critical thinker. There are quite a few different morals that are either taken from religion or were given by God that government legislation has used, but based on the article, it has seemed like not combination. So I guess I'm a bit confused on his exact argument because it seems to include only one aspect of not only religion, but categorizing the rational thoughts of people who have different religions. I think I've addressed this. I think Dennett would say it is definitely true that there are religious foundations to a lot of the basic values and ideals built into the American political system, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights. But I think what he would say is even our founding fathers, they were religious. I mean, we can debate how religious or whether they were Christians or not. But I think what they would say is, and if you've read the Constitution, if you've read the Declaration of Independence, there's nowhere in there that it says because God says so, or because that's what good Christians do, right? Our founding fathers used arguments and reason. They were part of the Enlightenment. They wanted to come up with arguments. So I think what Dennett would probably say is there's probably no moral or political or social claim that is only based on religion, right? That's the only way to justify it. There's probably another route to get to the same place, right? You could probably come up with other kinds of reasons to come up with the same conclusions. You don't need to believe in God to believe that all people are created equal, right? That's really talking about the kinds of rights people have. You can call them God-given rights, or you can just call them natural rights. And so throughout this semester, we're going to talk about a lot of things that will make sense to people who have religious beliefs, but would also make sense to people who, are atheists, right? Because they're just using reasons to come up with the same conclusions that someone else's faith might give them to. After viewing this video and reading the article, my only question is, why does Dennett feel that his views are superior to those who follow religion? I got the feeling that he thought that anyone who follows a certain religion is stupid, as if those people couldn't make decisions on their own. While it's generally accepted that blindly following isn't the correct way to do things, why does he feel like he gets to decide that that way of thinking is wrong? Well, Dennett is, of course, like all of us, free to have whatever beliefs he chooses. And Dennett, as a philosopher, I think he doesn't just tell you what he believes, and he doesn't just tell you what you should believe. I mean, I think if you read that article, and you did, he offers reasons where he's trying to persuade you that there's a better way of thinking about moral arguments than another way. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but in philosophy, it's not just your opinion that matters, it's the reasons that you can offer. I don't think Dennett thinks that all religious people are stupid. There are probably some stupid religious people, and there are probably some stupid atheists, and everywhere in between. What is he really saying? It's not that religious beliefs are stupid, but religious beliefs are faith-based beliefs, and there's something totally different than the kinds of reasons that make sense in arguments to other people. Now, Dennett might say, he wouldn't use the word stupid. Dennett is a good rhetorician. I don't think he wants to, call people names, but I think he would say, if your goal is to persuade someone else of some moral claim, it might be stupid to expect your religious beliefs to make sense to someone else. And so if that's all you have, if that's all you can bring to the table, you're probably not going to make much progress in changing other people's minds. The fact is, we do want other people to share our moral beliefs. We don't want to twist their arm. Maybe we don't want them just to believe blindly in what we think. But there's a reason why we take our religious or our moral beliefs so seriously. If you think abortion is wrong, or if you think it's wrong to kill animals, or that we should feed starving children, you probably think that's more than just something you happen to believe. You probably think that it is a good thing, for instance, that men and women be treated equally in our country, or that racism is wrong, or whatever moral belief you have. You probably want the society in general to agree with that, or you want people to pass laws to kind of, make that moral fact more realistic. And that means persuading other people. So what sorts of reasons are going to work when you're talking to other people? I think that's the sort of thing Dennett would say. What I love about that question is the person who wrote this question clearly had some feelings about Dennett, but the analysis that this person offered was really strong. It wasn't, I didn't see this person's kind of feelings about Dennett come through in that summary, and that's a really powerful way to entertain ideas, right? I mean, you want to be able to entertain the ideas without letting these kind of negative feelings you might have about Dennett, or these questions you have about where Dennett's coming from, infect the way that you analyze his ideas. And so kudos to this person. Dennett has many good points, but I find myself wondering how he feels on tradition. Much of the religious world is based on tradition, as well as the religious scriptures it has that would seem blind following is required to be part of the group. Well, I'll let you decide what Dennett would think. If a religion requires blind faith, I think you can probably guess that Dennett would be skeptical that that's a good idea. But I think he would say, you want to be able to trust that you know what your religious leaders are saying. But let me put it this way. Regardless of what your particular religion requires, if it requires blind faith, then that's up to you to decide if that's something you want to give. But when it comes to moral arguments and the political process, I think he would definitely say we don't want blind faith. Last but not least, and we're almost 25 minutes in, this person says, I replied to question 1 with what I personally think Dennett was trying to convey, but I wonder if I'm right. I wonder under what circumstances does Dennett believe that thou shalt not kill can be crossed? And I honestly don't know. I think Dennett would say it is up to us to argue about when killing is justified and when it is not justified. But just the phrase thou shalt not kill is probably insufficient, or a stock phrase like all life is equally valuable. It may sound good, But in order to actually implement something like that in real life, we're going to have to argue about the exceptions. And so I don't know enough about Dennett to tell you exactly when he thinks it's okay to kill and when he does it. But again, what about self-defense? What about war? What about the death penalty? What about abortion? What about assisted suicide? Um, what happens in cases where there are two dying people and there's only one organ to transplant, right? Who gets to decide these sorts of things and how do we decide them? Those are all issues that I think he says that's the hard work of ethics. I'm going to close this out. If you're still watching, thank you and keep up the good work.